Cool. All right, man. Well, first, Adam, nice to meet you, man.
Yeah.
Fishing. So you were going to be on the Deschutes today. Okay, so this is, I mean, just continuing where we were just picking up. I was actually dropped in at Moppin for a 4-day fishing trip down the Deschutes the day that those massive wildfires 4 years ago swept in.
Oh shit.
Dude, it was so like I grew up fishing a little bit. I'm from Oregon, and so we would go out to Central and we would fish. But like my dad wasn't like an avid fisherman, and I had just gotten invited to a group of buddies who had this kind of annual trip, and they're like, "Oh, we're doing this great kind of guided fishing trip, and people cooked for you." And I was like, "Yeah, man, you guys are high flying. This sounds great. Let's do it." And I was actually out in Bend the night before for a Bend Venture Conference, and just meeting people and talking about this idea that we had. I think that was BVP, and then I just like woke up, and like Bend smelled like smoke. And it was just like, oh, and I looked outside, and the sun was a little red, and then I drove past it, right? Because I came back west towards Moppin, and like the skies were clear, and then drove into that little inlet. I forget exactly where it was, but you drive through the back roads and you get to the little inlet for the raft. And my buddies show up, and I'm like, guys, is this gonna be okay? It's like I feel like something's happening here. And they're like, no, we talked to like the guides and we saw, and these guys are smart guys. And they're just like, no, it's going to be cool. And then sure enough, about like 2 hours into our initial float, like the smoke comes in. Luckily I'm an ex-smoker. So, it was like being back to smoking all day. But on that, the fishing was rad because it blocked out the sun. So you weren't casting shadows on anything.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of biting.
That's cool. Wait, so it wasn't the fire where the canyon was on. You weren't like floating down while the canyon was burning. It wasn't that fire, was it?
No, there were a few flames, but like the canyon itself wasn't totally engulfed. It was, I'll show you, I'll send you some pictures after this. It looked like we were, taking the ring back to Mordor.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like red and glowing, and like every shadow on the hill looked crazy, and we had to camp in it, man.
Yeah.
So
So you said that was 4 years ago?
it must have been
Yeah.
4 years, three or 4 years ago.
So I'm just trying to like identify which fire that was, like mid-COVID, where you're like, COVID sucks, COVID sucks, COVID
Yep.
sucks. Oh shit. We got to stay inside. Like it was like it took
Yeah.
COVID next level. It was that time. Right.
My dog is, if you can hear him,
Oh yeah.
doesn't like strangers at the door, but he's like a sweetheart. But yeah, it was because it was COVID. It was like that awkward in between, because it was the massive fire east of the Cascades.
Yeah.
Right. Because I remember one of the people that we were talking to, who I'd met, and this is during COVID, had his factory burned down in Salem.
Oh shit, that sucks.
Yeah, like I had one buddy who lost his house on the Mackenzie, another one who lost his factory. He has like a recycling business, and
Yeah.
it all burned down. I remember it burned down during that, but I was like fishing and enjoying myself, and just but
Somebody else was having the worst day of their life.
that's about it, man. That's how it goes. But anyways, man, so you and I got connected. You and I got connected with Hui, and Hui's like, I was like, dude, like we just have so many good conversations. Like, who should I talk to? Like, who is just rad and would love a candid conversation? He mentioned you, and he told me a little bit of your past, having done all this crazy work. And then he was like, this guy just loves to talk, and he wants to have a candid conversation. Not in like you're blabby, but like you're like willing to have a real conversation. So I wanted to hear about your history and the work you do, and man, that fabulous taste in chairs I see behind you.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is where like I just start rambling. I never know where to start. Maybe I'll just start with Hui, because you mentioned him. So what's funny about Hui is like I don't know that dude at all. He came to us. When I say us, I used to be a partner at this design studio called This. And he came to us a long time ago, probably like 7 or 8 years. And I think this is when he was working for Bishops. And so, I just chatted with him informally about through this pitch. We didn't get the work, and then that was it. But for whatever reason, the thing that stuck with me was that he was tapped into the dance community.
Yeah.
And I like to make a fool of myself. I'm not a great dancer. Like, my wife's a great dancer. Also don't drink, so it makes it harder for me to go out and dance. But there was a time in my life, like, I've been in Portland for almost 20 years, but there was definitely like a 4 or 5 year period where a lot of us who can't dance, we're just going to have fun and dancing.
Yeah.
And like, that's probably one of my 3 wishes is like, dude, I would love to just be this incredible dancer, because those people allow everyone to have such a wonderful time.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I have carried with me about Hui is that I'm like, he's a dancer or he's tapped into that community. And then over time, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and twice now she's, she just likes to move. She goes to Buckman, which is the performing arts public school, and they have dance and music and art and theater. And she just likes to move her body,
Yeah.
Anytime we watch a movie, she will, at the end of the movie, she just jumps up and just starts dancing, and almost like exultation, where she's just like, just excited about it. And most recently, she was like, I wanted, we went to go see the Jefferson Dancers.
Yeah.
And then hold on for one sec. Like, am I fuzzy?
I was just gonna say, yeah, you're a little blurry.
Give me a second. See if I can fix this for you.
All good.
Is that any better?
Great. Yeah. You're focused. You also flipped places on my screen, so it was kind of, it's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Dude, that's great. That's keep going on your story. I think we have a lot of parallel with Hui.
Yeah. So this is kind of an example of how I just like ramble and then I forget what the point was. But anyways, she wanted to take some dance classes. I don't know anything about dance. I know enough to like know people who do. And so I was like, oh, let me just reach out to Hui again. I had maybe reached out to him about some dance stuff 5 years ago. And, it's just like a quick email. And then he's always so kind to write back. And then, he wrote an email and was just like, check out these places for these reasons. And then he gave me an alternative solution just to say like, hey, my son does Kung Fu and he likes it because of the discipline, and it's not dancing, but it has structure and it has creativity. So like, think about this alternative solution, which I thought was cool. And we bantered back and forth, and then he just threw out the keyword of coffee. I was like, yeah, let's do it, man. I love getting coffee. So we just met up, and I had just come back from Alaska. I guess you could say I had a midlife crisis, and instead of choosing my wife and buying a sports car, I went up to fish commercially in Bristol Bay. And so I was I was just catching up, and I was like, I love getting coffee, but I wouldn't mind just catching up on chores. And then it just reminded me why I like just meeting up with folks, whether I know them or not, and having random conversations. Because we just sat down and it was just full throttle in like a connected way, and the conversation just ebbed and flowed. And then we just called it after like an hour and a half. I was like, all right, man, we got to go. Like, it wasn't any expectations of like, let's hang out again. We both were just like, this will lead to something. I'm sure we'll see each other again. And then it led to us chatting, and we just kind of talked about everything, just like having kids and the expectations, and then like what we enjoy and passing things down. And it was just a ramble that, I don't know, filled our cup, made us feel good, made us smile, give high fives, and then start our day. So yeah, that's kind of how it started. And what I enjoyed about that conversation is, he doesn't know anything about me and I don't know anything about him. So you can kind of get an objective viewpoint about things you're saying, and someone can affirm or can deny and call you out. And so he just identified some things where I was like, oh, I guess I do that. Huh. Like, oh yeah. Like he was basically my therapist at that moment that I didn't know that I needed. That was
Yeah.
just reflecting and being like, oh man, like you're pretty empathetic. It's wild that you make these random decisions that have nothing to do with your career, but it leads to the next step. And yeah, it was just really helpful for me. And you know, I'm thankful to him for just having that conversation. And if I never see him again, well worth it. Hopefully we continue to have conversations and hang out at some point. So that's kind of the connection point. Um, so yeah, I mean, at this point, I can kind of go off on different avenues because you're the one who's this is your thing. Where do you want me to go?
No, man, no, let's ebb and flow is the name of the game. I gotta share. So you know, my little path was, you know, Hui and I met through a friend. Her name's Jessie. She was at the time starting to build the Society Hotel in
Oh,
Portland.
yeah.
Yeah, before the one up in Southwest Washington. And she's just phenomenal. She's great. She's like the one of the most impressive people. She was like mother of two kids while like 8 months pregnant and building a hotel and like and running a bakery in Lentz or wherever it was. And she was like, I had an agency and we were in Chinatown, and I was part of this little business community. It was like when Chinatown was starting to get a little energy back, and like
Yeah.
Ian at Deadstock was just starting off with his cart, and Compound was there, and Upper Playground was there, and you know, John Jay had his thing. This is like pre everything kind of going weird. And there was just this energy, and I was trying to do that. And Jesse was like, "Oh, you got to meet this guy, Hui." And I was like, "Okay." And we sat down at the tea shop down there, and like, I got a totally different impression of Hui the first time I met him than who he actually is. Like, I thought she was, I didn't know what to expect, and then like we just hit it off, kind of in the same way where I had like no expectations, and we just started talking deeply about the world. And that led to him like being a part of the dance community, and he was doing all these activations. And I'm the exact same as you. I love and admire people that can dance. I think it's so cool. I think it's so cool, but like I don't have that skill. I was on the other side of this Portland scene where I was like, you know, a graffiti artist and a really mediocre, if not terrible DJ. And but I was obsessed with like, you know, growing up in Portland, that hip hop scene. So we used to go to these same parties together and not know it,
Yeah.
right? Because he's a talented b boy. He was a break dancer. I was like, man, those guys are too cool for me. They're, you know, and I'd lived in New York and done that whole scene. But then anyway, so I funny enough with Bishops, man, we were the ones that won that project.
Uh,
Um, yeah, but I think at some point there was an existential like, man, this guys are awesome. And but regardless, man, you know, we had worked together, and then on that stuff, but I had also just stayed close to some of his dance community because it was just super cool to watch all those people, and I helped him out in ways, and you know, would like help them with photo shoots and give them space and everything. And it was the same thing. I would like show up to them like having dance parties at bars, you know, at in Chinatown, of course. And they'd be like, "Come, come," and I'd sit there awkwardly in the back with like a pineapple and tequila. And I do drink, but it doesn't make me dance. Um, and I love the music, and I just appreciated it. It's like one of those parts of the arts, right? Like I don't know how you were growing up, and I'd love to talk about it, but like I went to a school that it was mandatory that we were in performing arts, right? You know, my mom made me take like acting lessons when I was a kid. I don't know why. Maybe she had a dream that I'd be more handsome than I am, but like either that or it was like, hey, be comfortable in front of people. So I was like, dude, I had to do musicals when I was like a teenage boy going through puberty. And it was like that. Nothing is worse than watching a teenage boy without a voice in general, like without a good voice in the first place, but then also the breaking voice
yeah.
playing Potiphar in Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. And like there's nothing worse than that. Like we have a videotape somewhere. It'll be a special hell to rewatch it, but I was comfortable with it and I just admired it because I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't my skill set. Now I can draw and I can do these things. Like I am good at certain things, but then I saw Hui and like he brought that very much that vibe to it of where like he was super empathetic, super understanding, and he was a dancer and he brought it, and you know, he can speak for days about theory and all this stuff. But anyways, man, we had the same path to it and like the same agency path. Now mine's diverged into this technology platform, right? And that's kind of like where taking the transition in industries, because I just got so tired of agency life. Like that's not why I transitioned. I transitioned because we had a legitimate thing, but like, man, agency life was a dude. It is not for the wary.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know how it was for you. Like it sounds like I mean, like how did you come into agency life and this? And it sounds like you were at other places as well.
Oh man, like that's I I don't know how to answer that except for telling you the story of my life.
Hell yeah, let's do it, man.
Um,
Tell me the story of your life.
yeah, so I always think about like I'm casually on time. Um, and so if you got a barbecue and it's like, hey, barbecue's gonna start at 4, it goes till kind of like dark. I'm not gonna show up at 4. I'll show up at like 5.
Yeah.
Um, but the only time that I'm on time is if I go see a movie because I don't want to miss the opening scene because I feel like that is so important. And it's the same thing with the book. Like, what is that? What is the opener? What's that first sentence? And then I think about like, what is my first sentence? And I think my first sentence would be the best that ever happened to me was watching my mom die. I grew up in Gastonia, North Carolina. It's just like a suburban town that if you pulled off on the side of a highway and got gas, you just see strip malls and you're like, man, who lives here? Like a lot of people live there. I'm one of those people who came from there. I had a lot of great friends growing up, and so it didn't matter. But my mom died when I was 17 from breast cancer. My dad was living in Atlanta. My sister was living in Raleigh. So I just lived by myself. And, you know, she died and it sucks, but it definitely set me off on this trajectory. At the same time, my sister was dating this guy, Vic Blue, who's this incredible photojournalist. And he and his friends were just saving money, going to travel, running out of money, and then doing that over, kind of rinse and repeat. So I kind of took this shitty thing that happened and was like, okay, every year I'm going to do something to keep things in perspective. Um, and that kind of still rings true today. But what that meant at the time, I was in, you know, I'd go to college, it was traveling. So, you know, I went to China for a summer, drove across the country for another summer. When I graduated college, I went to school for design at NC State, which is like a PSU. So, like, it's not a RISD, it's not a Cranbrook, it's not MCAT. It's just like um, just a public university that, you know, I didn't have to go insanely in debt to get a great education. But I just got on this cadence of doing like working really hard and then quitting and working really hard and quitting. And it's easy when you're younger because like I just worked at these restaurants. And so leaving a restaurant that I knew I could come back to was kind of low stakes. And then I hiked the Appalachian Trail when I graduated school. But when I finished, I ended up getting a job in Vermont working at Burton Snowboards because my best friend from high school, or one of my best friends, was working there. That's where I would meet Dennis and Toby, my former business partners, but they were roommates of mine in Vermont. And used to work for Dennis at a studio called Pete Kegler, and Toby worked at Instrument, and Instrument was owned by Vin and Justin and JD. Vin and Justin I knew from Vermont. Vin lived in the same house. Justin worked down the street. So, you know, like I just worked at Burton and cut my teeth in the agency world, or cut my teeth in the creative world in house for a couple of years. And in a way, I like to joke that I peaked too early because it was incredible. You know, it's just this insanely creative snowboard company run by 30-year-olds at a time when design wasn't just a typeface and white space. There's a lot of expression, so it maybe a little bit more mimicked art, and there was kind of a little bit more DIY ethos that came with it. And there's a long forgotten design studio called Jagger DePaul and Camp, or JDK, that just it put out the who's who of designers that I like to think about. But worked there for 2 years and was like, I'm gonna quit and go hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. Um, and the stakes are getting a little bit higher quitting my job, right? Like quitting the job at Burton was a lot harder, but it was just as easy than quitting a job working at a pizza place or a pasta place. Um, then I came out to Portland, got a job at Nemo Design, worked there for 3.5 years, quit in 2009, which was wild because I watched rounds and rounds of friends get laid off, but I had been saving for 3.5 years to go hike the Continental Divide Trail. Through that, I ended up getting a job working for Dennis at his studio, Pete Kegler. Worked there for 3.5 years, quit, and went freelance. And all the while, like I'm connecting back with my wife, who is a friend that I knew when I was 15. Like I was kind of that latchkey kid, and her family looked after me. She had come out in 2009 when I was hiking the CDT, and we kind of reconnected. So now all of a sudden my life is kind of having like these other layers to it. It's not just work and what I want to do. It's now involving other people. Um, and yeah, I just kept on the cadence of quitting and reinventing myself. And I'm not saying I'm following my dreams, because I think that's shitty advice for people when they say like follow your passion, because like it doesn't work like that
Yeah.
for most people. I understand the premise, but what I understand more is like, and this is from my own experience, I'm not saying it applies to everyone else, but like you can take a bet on yourself. And if you just try and if you work hard, if you do these things that don't take magical moments, like just trying something new, being curious, like just taking a chance on yourself, it gives you this confidence to kind of make these changes. And I never wanted to be a designer, never wanted to own my own studio, I never wanted to hike across the country. I've just kind of allowed these opportunities to happen because I just took these chances. And it doesn't mean that it always worked out. Like, um, I throughout all this, one of those layers is my wife and I eventually got married. She was pregnant. We bought the house right next to us, which was a shithole. We got it to the studs. I'm not a general carpenter, contractor, or carpenter. And like we almost got divorced multiple times because it was so hard, and we're self-funding and maxing out credit cards, and then having to pay daycare and 2 mortgages and figure it out. But through that, like there's some resiliency that comes from that. There's a lot of learnings. And dude, it sucked. Like the friends of mine would talk to other friends and they'd be like, oh man, I think we might need to check on Adam. Like he's just not doing so hot, and like physically, emotionally, and mentally. But you know what? Like here I am. And so all of this is just to say, like, how did I can't remember the question now. Like, what's my relationship to agency life? I don't know. I just bumped into it. I just took a chance. It's like this
Yeah,
opportunity,
man.
because I've taken all these chances, opportunities and different opportunities have kind of presented themselves. I won't say I've manifested them, because I've like, I wasn't just like, oh, I hope this happens. I put the effort in,
Yeah.
and just by staying curious and trying not to be an asshole, like I'm a solid C plus in terms of you, but I still show up and work hard, and I just try and be nice to people, and it pays dividends. And when, oh God, when would this have been, in like 2014 or 15? Dennis and Toby and I were all kind of at crossroads. We knew of some of our crossroads, others we didn't, but we were like, hey, you know what? Like Dennis was coming to the end of his time at Pete Kegler. I was just freelancing at a studio called OMFG Co. I was working 3 days a week, going fishing. It was like the time of my life. And I was like, fuck, man, if I do this, I'm gonna have to work harder. Um, but I was like, why not? I don't get many chances to like work with some good buddies of mine.
Yeah.
Um, and we did that for 8 or 9 years. And then, like I said, maybe I had a midlife crisis. Maybe it was COVID. Maybe it was just a time where I was like, I'm ready for some change. But yeah, I have some friends who are commercial fishermen in Alaska. And so as I'm going through like my crisis or just trying to figure out like, oh, what am I going to do next? I've kind of planted the bug in some of their ears and just said, hey, next year, can you think of me when you think about your crew? Then I needed a little bit of that extra push, like that metaphorical affair to get me out of
Yeah.
the situation with Dennis and Toby. And that situation that I was in was a wonderful situation. It wasn't bad. Like we had great clients. The people that we were working with, our coworkers were incredible. Like they're the ones who've made us who we are. You get a chance when you start a company to, like your past precedes you. So you get to see the impact that you've made in the form of people saying, hey, can we pay you to work with you? And man, what an honor and privilege. So the work was great. The people were great. Nothing was wrong except for um, I was just ready for some change, and it took me 2 or 3 years to be ready and to finally have my friends also say, we got a spot on the boat for you. Um, and so, yeah, I just made that change and was just like, hey, cool. I get another chapter and I don't know where that's going to lead. Right now, I'm trying to be the best fucking stay-at-home dad and stay-at-home husband that I can be. I've kind of picked up some freelance work, even though I didn't want to, but the people that I'm doing it
Yeah.
for are amazing. I don't care if it's a cool project or not. I'm going to give it my all and make it a cool project. But like, I love the people. And man, how flattered for them to say, hey, you, Adam, do you want to help us? And that goes a long way. So now I'm kind of back in the freelance world, which is good. I didn't leave the design world because I was like, fuck you, it sucks. Like it is a grind. I know exactly what you're talking about. Um, and sometimes it sucks and sometimes it doesn't. And I've had a break. I went to Alaska for 6 weeks and pulled fish out of a net and was humbled. And it's while it wasn't deadliest catch, it's still insane to have to work 8 to 10 hours on, have 2 or 3 hours off, go back 8 to 10 hours, get 2 or 3 hours off, and just to grind in that way. But it was a nice break from sitting in front of a computer. And yeah, I came back and I liked that open space, kind of that unknown of like, oh shit, I don't know what's happening. I'm fortunate to have saved some money. So like that time and that unknown space isn't something that you can tell everyone, oh, just quit your job. Like it doesn't work that way, right? Like people have to pay bills and put food on the table and they have commitments and that's really important. And um, I also know like I've worked hard to earn this, but I just don't want to squander it and say, hey, everybody, it's easy as doing this or doing that because it's taken me a lifetime to be okay to do that, and like I've been able to build every time I've quit my job and gone to do something. I never came home with zero money. I always would come home with a couple bucks. Because I think because my mom dying, I knew that like, oh shit is going to go sideways. And
Yeah.
uh, my dad, thankfully, was just like, you shouldn't have anybody to count on except for yourself fundamentally. Um, and he wasn't saying that like don't lean on friends and family, but he was just saying like you need to learn how to be independent and you need to
Yeah.
learn to take care of yourself. Um, and like that way when you reach out for help, you truly need it. So because of that, I've just always built upon the savings that I would always come home with just a little bit. And after I hiked the Appalachian Trail, maybe I had like $500 left because like, oh shit, I still got to pay rent. And then I would just build on that nest egg. And then eventually that $500 became $1,000 and that $1,000 became couple $1,000s. And so I've just been able to build this buffer over the past, fuck, 25 years to where people on the outside, it looks like I'm taking this big risk, but I'm betting on myself. And ultimately, the confidence that I have that I know it's going to be okay is the biggest insurance that I have. But I've also squirreled away money to say, like, I'm not going to jeopardize my daughter's health or
Yeah.
my wife, or I'm not going to sink the ship. Um, and you know, I feel like when you watch these type of videos or you see the TED Talk or these inspirational conversations, like for some people, they just fucking lucked out and they have the time or money or the experience or the aptitude, and people desire them. It's rare that I feel like you're just someone kind of like the Mike Rowe of World's Dirtiest Jobs, where like that dude just getting down with some shitty things and just saying how amazing it can be.
Yeah.
And from that, I feel like it's more, for me, it resonates more than the person that's saying, follow your passion, follow your dreams. Like, I don't know what my passion or my dreams, I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
I'm still going to pursue them. And I think for me, at least, that key right now is just to move forward. Um, and so I think maybe what I've just illustrated is like, I've just tried to move forward. I've, I've had setbacks. I've had things I've had windfalls. I've just tried to stay curious and kind of move forward. And that's just because I just have never known what I want to do when I grow up. Like Toby is this insanely talented designer, but he tells this story of like, oh, my mom found an old journal that said I wanted to be an art director when I grew up. Like, I didn't know what the fucking art director was. I didn't know what I was. I just knew like I could be a lawyer, I could be an engineer, I could be a
Yeah.
doctor. You know, I worked at cardboard box factories in the summer times. You know, I washed cars for $5, mowed lawns. So I just like, it was just that stereotypical suburban existence. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I mean, I just think because of these life experiences, I've been able to move forward. And it also is way harder to move forward now because I got a lot on the line. Like to leave a successful business is scary, you know, especially I
Yeah.
have a wife and a daughter and I have a mortgage that I have to pay for. I've got a car payment. I, you know, have to figure out health insurance. So it is scary. And as along the way, I also have like my wife's support and my daughter's support. And,
Yeah.
you know, like that is relatively new to me to be like, oh yeah, like my dad taught me just to rely on myself. And now like I've got this incredible family that's like, okay, cool, like we got you, go do this. And that
Yeah.
kind of me to say like maybe I wasn't being the best stay-at-home dad or house husband beforehand because I was moving forward and so busy in certain ways, but it doesn't mean that I can't recognize that and still try and show up.
For sure, man. I, it's funny with agency life and people that are attracted to agency life. I think I was thinking about this the other day, and I think it just attracts curious people. Like aside from expertise, design, writing, accounts, whatever the hell your thing is, because I've seen so many uh, talented like writers become account executives, right, or like vice versa. Actually, a buddy of mine who's from Portland, and he's pretty high up at Coke now, but he started off in like the ad world. He went to Oregon, went off and into the ad world because it was like cool and it was fun, like, and that's who he is. He's just like a really nice dude. And then he was like just a great account guy. He went from like advertising, was an account guy because just he's the most likable guy and he's very smart, but he's just naturally good at that. And then I remember one day talking to him. I was visiting him in New York where I had lived, and he was living there with his wife. And he's like, I think I'm gonna quit and become a copywriter. I'm like, are you sure, man? Like, you're a really good account executive. You got all these like relationships. Like, he wasn't asking me for advice or anything, but I was like, really? Like, you're a great account. He was working at Anomaly, I think, at the
Uh,
time. Yeah, and he was doing good work. And then it was like, yeah, I'm gonna be a copywriter. And I was like, are you? Are you? Like, are you? And then and he did it really well. And he's kind of gotten back into more the management side. But like, it's funny how that world attracts like the curiosity. I had the same thing, man. Like my art and design, like drawing was my escape when I was younger. Like that's where during all my tumult, I went to a pad and paper, right? Or like a pad and a pen. And I just was decent at that. And it led me to go to Pratt in New York where I went. And that was just this eye-opening experience because it was like, wait. There's a world around this. Like people do this for a living. And because I grew up in a family that it was like, yeah, it was doctor, lawyer, do that. And then I actually freaked out after Pratt and went in to become a mortgage broker because I was like, I need to make some money. And I'm decent at math too. And I was just like, okay. And I got my license and I was working there. And then I freaked out again and I packed a duffel bag and I moved to Hawaii and like became a part-time paid intern at this like media company and then just built it up and was like, hey, we could do some like literally we didn't have a creative wing. I was an account guy. And then our biggest client at the time was like rebranding, if you've ever been to Hawaii, this very famous drink of Hawaii called Pog.
Okay.
Yeah, it's passion orange guava, but in Hawaii it's like the quintessential local like beverage as a kid. And they were rebranding it, and I just like went home, put some things together in a printer and wrapped some milk cartons and like did this like crappy fresh out of art school mortgage rebrand. And they were like, oh, we love these, let's do this. And then we built up this creative side of our business and it worked out. And then that all the story is like, then I just had this next moment of like, maybe I can do this on my own, and moved back to Portland. And some of the people came with me. And I think it's the same thing that you're talking about. It was like the honor that like I went out and did my thing and they're like, hey, we'd love to work with you. Like, we'd love to follow you. And I was like, cool. And then parlayed that into, into my first company. And man, I made every mistake in the book and I freaked out so many times, but I feel like there was a necessity to it. Right. Or I wanted to pursue because I was curious. And the wonder of it was like, I would get to like one moment work with like Nike wholesale on like distributed analytics product. And then at the other side, I would get to work on like a milk company. Right. And you get to like meet amazing new people and learn a new business. And it like satisfied this like curiosity and maybe a little bit of that uncertainty.
Yeah.
But along the way, again, to mirror another one of your points, like I just found myself working with so many amazing and talented people. And it was constantly that of like, we can talk facetiously about but like meeting people that are just so passionate and have that drive and, they're talented in some way that you like look on, you're like, holy shit, that's so cool. Like I have none of that. I just want to be around that. And like, that's what the great part of agency life was like, you got to build teams, a lot of contract worker where you would just like work with all these people around all of it. And I think there was like a golden era in Portland too at that time, kind of like a little pre-COVID time where we had just the best food in the world. We had like the best design talent was just coming here just to live. Right. And it was like, there was just a vibe to it, and that thrived. I think, my particular instance of getting over it was honestly just a frustration. Um, First in like actually in the products and the tools, and that's what we built was like a better platform for our work. But there was also like a frustration in the impermanence of some of the work that we were doing. And like, we talked about the Bishop's bid. Like that was cool and it was fun and it was great when you're like winning it. But then I was also like super frustrated. I was like, man, I'm competing against people that I respect. And we're all doing all of this free work. Right. And all of this work. And like, yeah, we love it. But then if I were to go to like a lawyer and I would be like, hey, why don't you and this other lawyer compete and give me a better contract and I'll let you know who I want to work on that contract with. And I was like, that would be BS. Every other profession in the world would tell you to go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like I've always had this deep seated like protective nature over creatives, right? Because I think that like naturally intuitive people jump from mountaintop to mountaintop, but they don't necessarily have the skill set always to explain or journey the valley in between, and that discounts them. And don't get me wrong, there's people full of shit, just like there's people that full of shit that can work a spreadsheet and they can manipulate it because it didn't work out, right? It's the same thing. But being protective over those people, I was like, I always wanted to bridge that gap. And I would annoy the hell out of our clients because I would always go one step too far. I would like question their business and question their model because I also trained in that. And so it was like, it at some point it didn't fit me. Right. And I had to move on, I think, kind of largely to your point. Like maybe I wouldn't necessarily call mine the midlife crisis as much as it is like this business isn't containing this anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, I got to figure out. And so like now, right, with every day and what we're building is like genuinely building a product where my old self could exist better.
Oh,
right.
cool.
It was like a product to fix all the collaborative shit at the agency that we messed around with. I facetiously joke with people. I'm like, we're fixing copy and paste. And they're and like, it's resonating with people in certain, I talked to this awesome dude, this founder, this big company. And I was like, copy and paste. He's like, yeah, like the game of telephone that happens every time you hit copy and paste across these applications. I'm like, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't tell you like one, just at fast paced agency life, like the 24-hour, 48-hour pitch turnaround. Two, then the like agency to brand communication cycle that's just broken. And then fast forward to just like naturally how that exists in collaborative environments. Like you may just, I don't know, it's just copy and paste is broken. So, so that's what we're doing, man. But it's like, it's funny. It's like it's a new struggle. And I'm definitely curious, man, with like, you know, doing that and going back to the freelance world. Like my new struggle is one, switching from the service to the product side. There's a level of concreteness that is so satisfying. And it's like I wake up every day and I was like, I know exactly what I'm pulling towards. And I don't have that like jump all over, but then I also fight my better demons of like jumping from all the ideas I could go with that I was satisfied with at like agency life. And, you know, so it's that special kind of like readjustment. I don't know how, you know, the commercial fishing life, my sister spent time in a galley. She was like cooking on the commercial boats. But like going back to just some of that, like just the simplicity of like, hey, you have a task, 10 hours and 2 off or whatever it is. Like you have a task. That's what you get done. You're being told what to get done. There's no freedom in that creativity, right? There's none of that. You just have to do it and then you get to do it. Does that like, I mean, I guess I could extrapolate to the same thing as a trail. Like it's one step in front of the other, like just get to from Canada to Mexico. But does that satisfy that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Like, I don't, again, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to satisfy, but I do know that a lot of what, like the kind of, the action reaction or balancing each other out. And, you know, like in the agency life, at least in branding, you know, everyone can make something cool. There's so much cool shit out there. Then over time, like you're like, okay, well then like what's the why? What's the reasoning that we're doing what we're doing? Then you try and build frameworks and strategy decks to unpack the why. But at the end of the day, the head dude, he or she could just say like, well, I want it to be yellow. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
okay, like there's nothing you can do. And so you just ebb and flow in this world of subjectivity, which it can be really frustrating, but it also can be really nice because you just understand the world is just nuanced. And though you want something to be logical, we're people, right? And that's like a unpredictability that is beautiful and frustrating at the same time. But for me, you know, at least, yeah, maybe the hikes or the renovating the house, it provides a little bit of concreteness or like a more binary aspect of doing something. So like we're working on this place, like my buddy from Seattle came down and helped me plumb the whole house, kind of talked to me about how things work. And then eventually, you know, I put a toilet in, and when I took a dump and flushed that turd, no one was arguing with me that they didn't like the way the turd went down was too slow. It's just like turd in the toilet, no turd in the toilet. And you're just like, yeah. That's awesome. And like last weekend, in the same way of like the design world and the creative world, and so much of like the professional world, you're dealing with people, so there's all these unknowns. Well, I had a different toilet that was leaking. I had a water line that was leaking, and then I also needed to plumb in a water line into this refrigerator to have the ice maker and the water maker work. And even though I was like, okay, I know I'm gonna have to go to the plumbing store like 5 times, it's gonna be a pain in the ass. But I was kind of excited because I'm like, oh, cool. There's no more leak in this one toilet. There's no more leak in this one water line. And now the refrigerator, I can have water or get ice. So the idea of like, we were talking about, you know, offering a service versus offering a product and how you enjoy the product, because you're like, it's a little bit more finite. You're like, here's what I'm working on. I get the same satisfaction out of like swinging a hammer, digging a hole and putting a plant in, fixing water lines. I mean, and it really helps the service side of things, where I can just kind of draw upon some analogies of like else and just like frame things up in a way that maybe people can understand if I more information. So like I like that concreteness. And for Alaska, you know, truth be told, I think that was probably a big reason, just to say I would love to do something where it can be done, it's finished. I mean, it's endless, but it can be finished. Like, okay, the net's coming through the boat, there's fish, I need to pull the fish out of the net. And you're like, fish in the net, fish out of the net. Cool. Next one, like, our brailer bags are full, we need to go to the tender. Cool.
Dude,
need to go back. And even though it's a grind, you're just like, there's this false sense of accomplishment, even though it's endless, because the fish are just still there when they're there. But it's just nice. It was nice for me.
Dude, that's okay. So I talk to people fairly often about this, just not in this context of cooking. For me is a very similar small instance of that, right? Where it allows me this full loop. It's like turd in the toilet, turd not in the toilet, to your expression. It's like natural transition from turds to cooking. And you know, one creates the other. But it was exactly that, man. Like I always say, is like there was so much, and one nuance like that. My fiance, she does this thing at the beginning of every year that she had taught me, which is like select a word for the year. And like 2 years ago, when our first year doing it, I selected nuance. And that was my word. And it still is my word. I'm just not giving up on that word, because I truly, man, is like, you know, we could talk about brand and the whys, and I'm sure we should have another discussion sometime just about that. Cause that's why I would piss off my clients. Cause I was like, nah, you're approaching your entire organization incorrectly. They're like, we hire you to design a logo. I was like, no, I'm going to fix everything. But part of that came with the understanding of nuance and building around it. Like I always, you know, my problem before we got on this, you know, when we're talking about TEDx, is very similar. My problem with TEDx is it presents a single line, a linear solution to complex problems. Right. And 2 of my friends did one of the TEDx Portlands. And I remember like being in one of the training speeches, like to help evaluate it. And the coaches were just like, make it a tagline. And I was like, you're full of shit. I'm sorry, but like their entire approach is nuance. That's what makes them wonderful at what they do. It's that they approach it with all of this, and they don't try to approach a single solution. You know, it's like my kind of one of my guiding philosophies is that if somebody presents to me a single solution for a complex problem, they're full of shit or they're selling something. Right? Because nothing is that simple. It really isn't, right? It's why we ask questions, is why we need to do it, because the world is full of nuance. There's always shared perspectives. There's always a different viewpoint. And I think especially in creativity and agency life, in a business, right, in life in general, like if you truly look at the world for and appreciate it for that nuance, it can be overwhelming because you can see that like there's always another way to approach it, right? Like sure, you need to plumb your house and you could, make that pipe go, 1,000 different ways, but there is a simple way. And if you have a water leak, you can fix it and the leak's gone. And in the case of like cooking, bringing that back is like, it has always been that thing to me. Like starting in college is when I taught myself how to cook, because I just remember like this open-endedness and being in New York and like trying to figure out my life on my own and all this. And like, I could just go to the grocery store with a hunger pain and be like, I want to eat, it wasn't very complex at the time, pasta with some cheese in it. But it was like, at least I could go find the pasta, find the cheese, and do this. And now it's like more complex. And I can be like, okay, this is the meal. I'm going to go shop. I'm going to prep it. I'm going to cook it. I'm going to eat it. I'm going to clean, take the dump. And that's full cycle. And I get to rinse and repeat that. And every day I get to complete this cycle. And that is very cathartic to me, right? Of having those things. And like physical is the same way. It's why I love working with my hands, like building the tables and doing all these things, because it allows you to have an idea, complete something. And I think that there's an impermanence in especially the design world, or the subjective opinions of, I want it yellow, I want it bigger, I want this. And it's like, okay, at the end of the day, that's what you're paying me for. But like, you're also paying me for my expertise, right? And that can be really, I don't know how you handled that, or you guys tackled that at your companies, but like the subjective opinion when you're hired as an expert to do something is difficult, right? It's difficult to separate.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you ever figure out that answer. I think you just figure out your relationship to that answer. But like over time, I'm just like knew that it was going to come. And, when I first started out as a designer, it was crushing. And then you're just like, there's just come territory. So like, we know it's going to happen. And if you can expect it, then the impact isn't as much. And I think then you also like what I've done is I've tried to focus on the personal relationships. And so I could say, come on, Jake, like you're saying this, like I can just have an honest conversation with you. And at the end, I'm like, if you still want yellow, that's fine. But like, I'm just going to have an off the record conversation and trying to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And then you make the call. You make the call, then we're going to move forward. I'm not going to dwell on it anymore. But kind of back to this idea of nuance and like the things being a little bit more binary or having a complete cycle. It's interesting because like I can tell, well, I'm going to go back one thing to say, like the nuance as it relates to my journey and what I've said. What I haven't said is like, the reason I'm at where I'm at is not because of me. It's because of all of these people. Like this, it's almost like the exact opposite of what my dad told me of like, you got to rely on yourself. And like, even though that might be the vision or thing that I'm trying to do, what's really happening is like, I've just built this community that has picked me up and carried me forward and continues to do. And so like, I like people, even though they're really frustrating. And sometimes I just want to be like, fuck you. Sure, wasting my time. But like, my success is directly related to everyone else. Like Dennis and Toby professionally, like, man, I've learned so much from them and I will continue to learn from them. I only lived in Vermont for 2 years, but it keeps paying dividends because of the relationship. So like, if you look at some of the rambling that I've said, or like if you look at it with a nuanced lens, there's so many different factors that come into play. It's not just about like taking a chance on yourself or moving forward. Like it is, but like it's with cooking, like sometimes it's these other ingredients, right? Like you might just want to make pasta. Sometimes it might just be a quick butter pasta, or it might be you're like, let me grab a jar of Rouse and let me grab some already cooked pasta. Then sometimes you're like, I'm gonna roll the pasta out, then I'm gonna use Rouse. Then sometimes you're like, I'm gonna make the whole thing. And so like what's nice is you can look at some things that are a little bit more action oriented or binary, but they have the same complexity as the creative service industry that we've come from. We're just starting at a different endpoint, side point, beginning point. And for fishing, that's a perfect one where like I'm trying to look at it through the lens of fish in the net, fish out of the net. But when I'm watching my buddy Shy understand like, oh, well, we're at high tide and there's going to be a big negative tide. So the water's going to come up faster. We're fishing the flats. I've got to position the boat in a certain way to make it easier for you guys to handle the net. But I also have to be ready as the water's ebbing and for us to round haul or flag or do all these other things. And so like for him, the complexity is infinite and he's calculating the dynamic changes. And I'm like one fish out of the net, right? And so it is really interesting to say like, oh, cool, I'm looking for these things that are a little bit more binary, but really it's just the point at which it's just how you want to frame it up. Because my buddy who's a plumber, like, I mean, he's this incredible folk musician. I love this dude. And there's artistry to plumbing. There's artistry to everything, right? Yeah. There's nuance to everything. And you can make it binary, but that might be like the expression that I need to satisfy an itch for the moment. But I do notice because I'm curious, I'm looking for the nuances. I just need the binary aspect of like turd in the toilet, turd out of the toilet.
Yeah.
Just like get me energized in a different way.
Dude, you're right. So it's funny, is like there is an artistry in everything when you take it to certain people that do that craft, right? Like you have an Eames chair behind you, right? Which is, you know, it's a popular chair, right? Because it is crafted by two people, by a studio that was arguably the best at what they did because of their approach, right? Like simplicity and the elegance and the streamlining and the manufacturing process. That was like, even they're just like their form chairs, like their form shaped chairs that as kids, right, we're probably around the same age. Like we grew up and they're kind of ubiquitous and you're just like, oh, the chairs. But then you like realize like the fiberglass manufacturing had the same artistry and passion that like Frank Lloyd Wright attempted with the single family home, that most people think of as like big, elegant mansions. They don't know that his entire life was dedicated to actually a mass produced, affordable single family home. And that was his secret passion, right? And it was the same in the Eames. And, you know, it gets back to this, like, you know, that there's an old adage in craftsmanship that if you want to see a mark of true craftsmanship, you actually have to look at the part of the cabinet that faces the wall. You have to look at the part that not everybody sees, is essentially that, right? Yeah. And that's where it's like, yeah, you go into that circumstance, right, to your fishing. It's like one fish in, one fish out. And to your thing is like, you see the buddy, you know, captaining the ship and he's, you know, rudder and he's like moving things around. And like, if he does his job, it's just easier for you and you don't notice. Yeah. But then if you unpack what he's doing, and even if he's not doing it on this conscious level, because he's so experienced now, there's a subconscious understanding of the, you know, the tidal flows and the way that you have to pull the net and how that's affecting the flow of the fish. And like those, all that nuance is absolutely key to those circumstances. And that's, you know, I would always present it because I'm just a visual person. You know, I would draw it out like this. I would say, you know, like every decision in life is actually better looked at as a frame than a line, right? Or a pipe is how to plumbing. Yeah. You know, because it is three-dimensional, right? If not four. And it's better to look at it as like, hey, you know, you can pretend to draw a straight line between 2 points, right? And say that that's how you want the world to go. But you know that things are constantly going to go like this for whatever reason. It's like, it's better to think of your world as, you know, in the case of a two-dimensional, is like you have a frame at the top, says here's the peak that we can get to here, and frame at the bottom, which is here's the trough that we can get to here. And there's going to be infinite inputs, right, from the opinion to the time, etc., that go on and bounce off those things. But that's, to me, that's how I best suited like brands. right? Or like design or product directives is don't come up with a single statement. Come up with a frame that those nuances can live in. And if you do that, you're going to be more successful because it's going to allow for emergent factors. It's going to allow for emergent inputs, and it's going to allow you to be much more flexible and I think patient with the world in that respect that you need in all those cases. But it's wild, man. Like I respect the hell out of the creative journey. Um, I had a friend. I started this whole journey in fine arts, right? Um, I could paint real well and draw real well, right? And I loved it. I had a friend who she's magical, man. She's one of my like childhood best friends, and she's one of the guys, if you will. It's just like we've all just known each other, and it's like seamless. But after high school, she just started traveling the world, and she hasn't like she went to New York for a little while, but she really hasn't been back in the States yet. She's been in Paris and the Middle East and Colombia and I think she's in Mexico City now. Who knows, right? And she came and visited at one time, and we're sitting at my place in Portland, and she's like, man, looking at my paintings. She's like, why don't you do this? Like, why don't you do this anymore? And I was just like, because it's not me anymore. My life changed. And there's a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into. Like I can unpack that, but the matter of fact is like that was a time in my life, and I'm at this different time in my life because of the people around me and the things that I've been through. And I think explaining that to people and really allowing for that in like everybody's story that you're working with is important. You got to make room for every like the nuance and then the understanding that even those simple instances that you take for granted, that there's artistry, that there's consideration, that there's people bringing bringing their all to those moments. And I think honestly, man, professional creativity, design, agency life, whatever you want to call it, is one of the very few industries that makes room for that. Like it truly does. And and there's a sense of like, sometimes it can be like the bond of being in the trenches together on like a quick, terrible project. And sometimes it's like the bond of making something beautiful, of like parenting, of like where you built something together. And it's just, it can be a magical place.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think what it did for me is it helped build my confidence. Like I struck out in T-ball as a little kid twice. Like like if you sit with that for a moment, you're like, oh, T-ball. The ball is on you struck out in T-ball and twice. And now as a parent, I'm like imagining what the other parents felt. Like if my daughter played T-ball and she was about to strike out, I know that all the parents would be like, please God, just let this person hit that ball. Just let him hit the ball. And like I wouldn't, I was kind of a shy dude, a little bit more of an introvert. And, I think traveling, taking jobs, changing things started to build confidence. But like another like nuance to my personal equation is like design has always been there. And while I may not be the best designer, what the tools that it has given me to problem solve is insane. And I can take that framework and that approach to any problem, like hiking a long distance trail where you're like, oh, you're just breaking an abstract big goal into small digestible bites. What's the best way to do it? I'm not coming to this organically. I'm coming to this like because I'm crying or my feet have a bunch of blisters. I'm just trying to figure out like, well, what's going to be the carrot that I can dangle in front of me for the next 2 days? Oh, pizza in Irwin, Tennessee. Okay, cool. I just got to get there. But over time, I've just realized like, man, that the design and creative world, and well, let me phrase that: design, not the art world, because the art world gives me anxiety, but the design is something that I've learned how to work within because there's a little bit more tactility. There's a process in that framework, and I figured out how to use that. And then it's also brutal, and it's affected my life in negative ways with my wife and some friends because, like in the design world, You just build things up and then tear them down and build them up and tear them down. And you're fortifying ideas and pressure testing. And then the next thing you know, you're doing that with relationships. And you're like, oh, you don't realize you're doing it. You're just challenging and challenging and challenging. And sometimes motherfuckers just want to be heard. And sometimes you should just listen. And so like that's kind of the secondary lesson where I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I should just shut up and not try and solve the problem. Maybe I could just like listen a little bit more.
Yeah.
But again, like still great things that I've learned from the design world. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, man. I think you're right too, also to bifurcate design and art in that respect. Like my way of always, because I've weirdly straddled both worlds, right? Where I'm, I'm good with numbers and I'm good with design and shapes, right? And abstract space. So it's made me kind of float between them in a weird way. I think it's been a real big benefit because I can kind of like span both worlds, but it has its own detrimental effects. And regardless, what I would always say, like in my love and passion for intuits, for creatives, for designers, whatever, is like, listen, design, there is a single-handed value that designers have, um, that I think that holds, like that they have, that is so beneficial to the world, and that is the ability, the innate ability to reduce complex thoughts into very simple things.
Yeah.
Like that is like at its heart, that is design. Like, how do I take the most basic shape or and color effectively, right, and communicate a message, right, in whatever respect. And that can be through motion, that can be in dimension. I think like right now we are specifically in a time, like at the rise of generative AI, at the over proliferation of any idea, where people confuse output with effectiveness. And it's like, listen, yeah, I can prompt something to create whatever the hell is in my mind, but that doesn't go through the refinement and the simplicity process. That comprehension aspect is still essential. Like the old adage is more true than ever. Any idiot can make something more complicated. It takes a special mind, a genius, whatever you want to call them, to make them simple. And that's where designers, I think, really, I think that's where good and especially great designers have a leg up, is they look at things like you were talking about. Yeah, you sure call it your necessity of having, crying and having blisters on your feet, but you're going through the same exercise of like, take this very arduous, very long, very, very daunting task and break it into its minimum digestible things. That's, I mean, effectively, man, that's design. Oversimplifying it, that is design. It's like somebody comes to you with the shittiest RFP in the world. I have this idea. I want to make, chairs great. And you're like, all right, okay. I have no, like chairs. I understand what a chair is, but what does great mean to you? And in what context? And where are you selling this and to who? And you like, you ask all your questions. It's like your job as a designer, especially at your level, is it goes beyond making something a pretty color. It's like understanding the core reasons and motivations and whys behind that, and then interpreting this linear thought into an abstract shape that communicates it to as many people as possible at an instant in time, regardless of context, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to make, you like simplify it to a logo. You have to make a logo communicate whatever it is the message is or the product is, when somebody that's having a shitty day on a stormy, rainy, cloudy February Portland morning, and when they're having a great time, well fed, half drunk on a summer night, right? And your design still has to work the same way. Like, dude, that's a crazy thing to ask, but designers can do it. And yeah, man, it's a fabulous thing. Okay, I have taken tons of your time, man. First of all, thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I'm gonna definitely make you get coffee with me when I'm in Portland next.
Where do you now?
I'm in California right now.
Okay,
Uh,
cool.
Funny enough, man, like we've been going through the transition, and I've I traveled for work one time to Raleigh
Oh yeah.
and fell in love with Raleigh because my last little quick story is like, I was in Hawaii. We went out to Durham actually to like a manufacturing facility for that same Hawaiian beverage. Like
Yeah.
that's where the packing, evergreen packaging in Durham. And we got in there at like 11 at night to this like motel in Durham. And my coworker, she was from the company, had just won, if you're probably not familiar, but it's like the World Series of hula dancing. It's called the Merry Monarch Festival.
Oh, cool.
Like, yeah, and she had just won. Like, this is a big deal, especially in like the Pacific Rim. And she won, and then immediately jumped on a plane. We got to Raleigh, and we got to this place, and we were checking in, right? And we were like, where do we go to eat? And they sent us to this barbecue joint called the Pit in Raleigh. And the chef came out, and it was like, the obnoxious people that come in at like closing time and order, right? That's who we were. And then the guy was like, you guys just got in from Hawaii? And we are like, yeah, man, we're so sorry. Like I know it's last, but like there was nothing else to eat. And and he's like, no. He's like, hold up. He's like, you're getting the tasting menu. And then I'm gonna scramble up some extra stuff. And he like made these like cheesy shrimp grits I cannot forget. And then he was like, also, I'm prepping the pig for tomorrow. And it's like, I know Hawaii likes the pig, so like we're gonna do this. And he like takes us into the back, and he like shows us all this stuff. And my coworker and I were just like looking at each other like, this is the greatest place on earth. We're like well fed, everybody's friendly, and I just fell in with Raleigh. So as we were looking to like open up another office and be within the community, we were looking at Raleigh, the triangle, and it didn't end up being like as metropolitan as we wanted. Like great people, lots of great companies, but not what we were looking for. And then went to Charlotte, and Charlotte was kind of like it felt like Portland in '02. It's like still on the come up, and it's got a lot to do. Really cool city, but we're kind of narrowing down to Atlanta right now. But I'm still up in Portland, going to be back all the time. And it's the grind of growing a business, man.
Oh, no, dude. Well, Atlanta's fucking awesome too. I mean, yeah, I think any of those places would be great. But yeah, next time you come up here, let's get Hui and we'll all get some real coffee together.
Dude, I'm so excited. I miss my coffee shop. I miss it, man. Like my dog and I, that was our morning. Like we'd wake up and go to Barista. I lived in the Pearl, so Barista on 13th. And I love barista coffee. I think it's like a dark roast. It's smooth. It's none of the lighter acidic stuff, which is my palate. And I miss it. Every time I'm back, I go to the same coffee shop and harass them.
I mean, maybe this is a perfect way or segue into how to end this of like, so Billy used to work at this coffee shop called Albina Press, and it was like this ground zero for third wave coffee, like in the early 2000s. And then he was starting up Barista, and I knew him just from going into the coffee shop just to shoot the shit with some friends. And then he was like, can you help me make a logo? And so I made that logo in trade for coffee. And, I still go there to this day and still run into him. And it was just like a nice full circle way of like, I go into this place to ramble and shoot the shit, help somebody out because I like the dude. He needed some help. I got some free coffee out of the deal. It worked out well. And, we're having this proverbial coffee right now. And you just mentioned Barista. So that's a nice way to close this out.
Dude, I love it, man. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. I'm going to give a shout out to Hui once this is up. And let's stay in contact. As soon as I'm back in Portland, let's do it. All right.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right,
All right,
Jake.
Adam.
Have a
Great
good
to meet you.
Yep.
All right. Bye.
See ya.